Hey, what's up? Welcome back to Bengal Bites, your favorite podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals, I'm sure. This is episode 79. This is the Week 17 preview episode where the Denver Broncos are going to come in to Paycor Stadium at 9-6, looking to clinch their playoff spot. And the Bengals are trying to keep their season and their playoff hopes alive because they're at 7-8. One more loss will put the Bengals out of contention, but going to keep it positive on this episode. Going to try to think positive and hope that the Bengals are able to pull it out. The odds makers are putting the game in the Bengals' favor. Perhaps surprisingly, the Bengals are 3-point favorites at home, and they're saying they need a big crowd out there. So I don't know. Hopefully nobody sells their tickets to the Broncos fans. Hopefully it's a good, wild crowd, but I'm feeling a little bit nervous. There wasn't a ton of great news coming out of the Bengals camp this week, even though they got the great win against the hated Cleveland Browns last week, and they're on a 3-game win streak, which is the first of those they've had all season. I'm not overly optimistic if the weather gets wet and rainy. There's a chance for rain in the forecast. It could be starting after the game, could be during the game. I'm not sure, but I think the weather is going to play the primary factor in the outcome of this game, because if it rains, we know the Bengals are the best, or one of the best, precision passing teams in the NFL. All that goes out the window as soon as it's raining, and then it's going to be a much more even fight offensively. And the Broncos on defense have one of the best, if not the best, defense in the NFL. Definitely one of the best in terms of 18.6 points allowed per game. That's like number 4 or 3 in the NFL. They don't give up a ton of yards. They got one of the best cornerbacks in Pat Surtain, the second. So it's going to be an interesting matchup as he goes up against Jamar Chase, as he continues to chase his triple crown and lead all 3 categories. But the last time the Bengals played the Broncos in Denver, Jamar Chase only had 1 catch for 3 yards in that game, even though the Bengals won one of the least productive games of Jamar Chase's career. So he's going to be looking to have a much better performance in this game against Surtain. We'll have to see if the Bengals are more creative in moving Jamar Chase around the field so that the Broncos aren't able to key in and put their best defenders up against Jamar Chase. One of the key things that we're going to have to hopefully have in this game is T. Higgins, the other wide receiver. He was on the injury report, as he's been all week, or all season, I should say, after T. Higgins suffered a couple leg injuries in his hamstring and his quad. They wanted to be careful with T. Higgins, and I'm sure he didn't want to miss any more games because the Bengals offense looks completely different without T. Higgins on the field. So they're just letting him rest pretty much all the way through the week, get minimal practice time with T, and then break him out for game day. But he had that little bit of an ankle tweak from Denzel Ward on that tackle last week against the Browns. He was out for only a few plays, but they listed him as questionable with a knee and ankle injury. I would expect T. Higgins to play in this game. It's also looking like Orlando Brown Jr., left tackle, who has been out for the last 3 games, is going to try to make another return. He's already had missed 6 games. If he were not able to go, I think this would be his 7th missed game of the season, but he got injured initially. We thought it was a calf or a knee, and then he went out for 3 games, came back against the Steelers, then obviously gave up a strip sack around the edge. We saw that on Hard Knocks, and then he's been out ever since then. So now the season is on the line. This is like must-win game number 17 for the Bengals so far, or actually number 16. They haven't played 17 games yet. But this would be must-win game, it seems like, every week for the past 3 months. And Orlando Brown, if he is able to come back, hopefully he's able to have the same kind of performance he was having early on in the season when he was playing some of his best football, looking like the Pro Bowl they hoped they've signed when initially. But if he's, not able to move, we'll see. We'll see what he looks like. Hopefully they don't put him out there on one leg. But that's going to be a rough challenge for him. They said it's his fibula and something he's just going to have to deal with. It doesn't require immediate surgery. Obviously, he's trying to hope to play through it. But I don't know what the long-term ramifications of that injury are going to be. Hopefully, he's able to make a full recovery and come back next year. But hopefully, he's able to play and play well, because the Broncos on defense have some of the best defensive ends and pass rushers. They got Zach Allen. They got Nick Bonito. Nick Bonito has 11.5 sacks, just one behind Trey Hendrickson. So it's going to be a tough matchup for the Bengals on offense, not to mention the fact that Amarius Mims on the right side also is dealing with an injury of his own. So this is another strange situation with Amarius Mims where, like in the preseason, there was an injury that popped up after the game that they didn't even talk about immediately after the game, but it was like a day or two later, where now Amarius Mims has a broken hand. I'm not sure which hand it was, left or right, but I don't know which one would be better for the right tackle, to have a broken left hand or a right hand, because he's going to be playing with a club on. And so they say offensive linemen hold every play. It's hard to hold if you have a club on your hand. And depending on which hand it is, whether it's the inside hand or the outside hand I'm thinking of, I think if it's the outside hand, that could be even worse, because that is the hand you really need to do most of your holding with. If you're on the right side, that would be your right hand, especially if you're right hand dominant. But that's probably the hand that he broke, honestly. They still didn't say how he broke it. He didn't come out of the game because of that. They said he came out of the game because of an ankle injury. More on that later. But I didn't see any injury to his hand, and maybe it was just something that started hurting, much later the next day. Who knows? But that's going to be obviously a disadvantage for the Bengals offensive line and Joe Burrow as they try to protect him. Hopefully he's able to go through that ankle and the hand and whatever it is. He should be able to play as well. But otherwise, I think the Bengals on offense are pretty healthy. Now, the only people I'm going to be talking about in terms of an injury report are Bengals, because the Broncos are basically completely healthy. They didn't have anybody on the injury report at all. Part of the reason was the Broncos last played 2 Thursdays ago. I'm recording this basically on Saturday, day of the game, and perfect time to put out a podcast, I know. But Broncos last played on Thursday Night Football, so they've got an extra 3 days of rest compared to the Bengals, who are on a short week. Bengals played last Sunday. Now they got to play again on Saturday afternoon at 4:30 on NFL Network. Broncos have that extra time to prepare. Nobody is on their injury report. Meanwhile, there are a few other players from the Bengals who were on the injury report. Sam Hubbard continues to be on the injury report. I don't know why they don't put him on injured reserve, because he's clearly not coming back from that torn PCL. They showed on Hard Knocks, Sam Hubbard said that he could be back in time for the Super Bowl if the Bengals made it that far, but it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of, joke, I would assume. Sam Hubbard, hopefully he's able to make a full recovery, but that's going to slow him down going into next year. They also said Tanner Hudson is going to be doubtful. He did not practice all week. And Charlie Jones is going to be questionable with that groin. He's been out for like the last 2.5 months. We haven't seen Charlie Jones since the Week 7 Browns game, I want to say, or maybe Week 8. But it's been a long time since we've seen any Charlie Jones. And Joseph Osai did not practice Wednesday or Thursday because of an illness. Also, Geno Stone did not practice on Thursday because of an illness. So maybe there's some kind of a flu bug going around within the Bengals. Sheldon Rankins is out of the game. He continues to be ill. But Sheldon Rankins has been out with illness for, 5 or 6 weeks at this point. So I don't think it's the same thing. It's probably one of those things around the holidays. People get together with large groups of people. There's contagious diseases flying around everywhere. So guys coming down with the flu and whooping cough and all kinds of stuff. So that is not going to go in the Bengals' favor particularly. We also saw Joe Burrow on the injury report as limited participation with that right wrist and knee bruise that he suffered. Outside of that, though, Bengals are looking pretty good. But we'll have to see. I mean, as we know, they're still missing Logan Wilson at middle linebacker. So I would imagine Akeem Davis-Gaither and Jermaine Pratt are going to continue to get the majority of snaps. They have not looked very good. Defensively, the Bengals have said that they attribute a lot of the recent success that they've had to defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo making things more basic and simple, not so complex, easier for guys to just get one call, one play, and not be indecisive and worrying about, oh, is it this or is it that? Should we do this thing or that thing? Maybe that was part of the reason why Cam Taylor-Britt was getting confused earlier on in the season, was he wasn't sure, are we playing this coverage or that coverage, and getting stuck in the wrong thing. Who knows? But I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we have to admit that the other part of the success the Bengals defense have had is playing quarterbacks who are horrible and not really NFL caliber. I mean, we're talking about DTR last week, statistically one of the worst quarterbacks out there. Will Levis the week before that, he's been benched because of all the turnovers. And of course, Cooper Rush for the Dallas Cowboys playing like a statue out there and still almost beating the Bengals. From a points perspective, I think that was the Bengals. Let me double check. 6 points. That's the Bengals' best performance they were able to muster defensively. They got 7 points. That's why I said that game felt like the game against the Giants, because it was almost the exact same score. Giants got beat by the Bengals 17-7. Bengals beat the Browns 24-6, but it was 17-6 at the end of that game, and then Joe Burrow threw that garbage touchdown to Jamar Chase. I shouldn't say garbage touchdown, but garbage time touchdown, meaning the game was already decided. Really, the Bengals probably should have just taken a knee and run out the clock instead of throwing a touchdown pass. But whatever, might as well score a touchdown. If it was a free play anyway, so Myles Garrett jumped off sides. Hey, if you don't want him to score a touchdown, then you don't jump off sides or stop him. The guy who was playing defense on Jamar Chase didn't have to let him just run by and score a touchdown. So I wouldn't accuse the Bengals of running up the score on the Browns. And like I said, the Bengals fans really needed something to cheer about in these home games anyway. That was only the second win that the Bengals have had at home. So this game is another opportunity to get a win in front of that home crowd at Paycor Stadium. But this is going to be a challenge for the Bengals because they have yet to beat a team with a winning record, even at the time or now. None of the teams that the Bengals beat have winning records. There's a lot of have and have-nots in the NFL, surprisingly, this year. There's a lot of teams with really good records and a lot of teams scraping along the bottom with 3 wins that seem to be everybody's a race for the bottom to try to get better draft picks once they hit about the midway point and realization has sunk in that they're not really going to be contenders. They start sitting their key players, playing quarterbacks who really shouldn't be out there, DTR. Speaking of which, they did show Joe Burrow lending some words of encouragement and advice to DTR after the game on Hard Knocks and on the mic'd up segment that Joe Burrow did for the Bengals. They showed him going up and just saying, keep using your legs to DTR. So he was, I had to go back and watch the DTR post-game press conference just to see what he said. And he's still going to be the starter for the Browns, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly because the Browns want to lose. But he was talking about how, the calf injury, he didn't want to make an excuse for it, but obviously that slowed him down and something happened. He said he felt it pop like the second play of the game, but he stayed in the game because, basically when is he ever going to get a chance to start as an NFL quarterback outside of these last few weeks? So even if he said basically unless his bones were broken or the muscles pulled off the bone, he was going to still go out there and play. So I got to respect DTR for the effort, and I'm glad that he played against the Bengals because he was not any good. But in this game, Bengals defense is playing Bo Nix, who's a rookie quarterback who has had his ups and downs. He's had moments of where he looked really athletic, moments of looking really competent as a passer, but also some really boneheaded mistakes. Threw 3 interceptions in their last game that they lost to the Chargers. And some of, not all interceptions are created equal. Some of them were tip passes. Some of them were just bad throws, whatever. But Bo Nix, for a rookie, has been surprisingly good, especially considering out of all the quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round of last year's draft, Bo Nix was number 6. There were quarterbacks taken 1, 2, 3 with the Bears and Caleb Williams. Commanders took Jaden Daniels. And then the Patriots at number 3 took Drake May. And then Michael Penix went at number 8 to the Falcons. He's finally getting a start. They replaced Kirk Cousins, and he got a win. Granted, I think they were playing up against the Giants. So one of the worst teams in the NFL that's not even trying to win. I think they won like 34-3. Defense scored 2 touchdowns, including a touchdown pick 6 by Jesse Bates, who continues to be one of the best free agent acquisitions the Atlanta Falcons have made in a long time. One of the worst free agent decisions the Bengals have made, but let's not get into that right now. Anyway, Broncos and Bo Nix, their offense isn't amazing, but they have some really big physical wide receivers like Courtland Sutton. A lot of people don't really give him enough credit, I think, for his run blocking. He's been known to drop a few passes here and there, but when he's out in the open, he usually catches most of them. He's Bo Nix's favorite receiver. I understand why. He's like 6'4" and runs super fast and can jump and run all that stuff. But in the running game, if you'll notice, number 14 is Courtland Sutton. He'll be out there blocking Cam Taylor-Britt or whatever defensive back is trying to guard him. Usually covers him up like he's an offensive lineman or another tight end out there. They've got Vele is their other, I think he was a 7th round pick. They've got a few wide receivers, a few players, a few running backs who could cause some damage to this Bengals run defense, which has been looking better as of late. But again, maybe it's the level of competition. So this is going to be another test. This is going to be a test to see, did the Bengals really figure something out, crack the code on whatever it was that was causing them problems and get substantially better, or were they just playing teams that weren't very good? It seems to have worked out perfectly for the Bengals. Bengals are the perfect dividing line of average. Any team that the Bengals play that they beat, below average. Any team that beats the Bengals, above average. And if you look at the Broncos schedule, they've been playing some easy opponents. I mean, they play, the Raiders are in their division. They get to play them twice. They've played I think they played a 4th place schedule. That's probably, the AFC and NFC North are playing each other anyway. But Broncos have not had an extremely tough schedule either. They lost, I think, both of their games to the Chargers. And so when you try to put them up against each other, I think the Broncos got blown. Oh, no, they had a close game against the Chiefs, but they got beaten pretty badly, pretty handily by the Ravens, I want to say. So some of the similar opponents that the Bengals and the Broncos have had, like the Bengals played the Chiefs a little bit better than the Broncos did, and the Bengals had closer games against Lamar Jackson and the Ravens than the Broncos did. So maybe on paper you could say, by some kind of relative transitive property, Bengals are the stronger team. We'll have to see. But like I said, I think the biggest factor out of all of this is going to be whether or not it rains. If it is a dry game and Joe Burrow is able to connect with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, even as strong as the Broncos defense is, if the Bengals don't turn the ball over, that's the other critical element. Even if it's dry, it's going to come down to turnovers. And Patrick Surtain has got 4 interceptions, which isn't a ton, but that's the most he's had in his career. But the other part about Pat Surtain is quarterbacks don't even test him. They're throwing less than 4 passes at players that he's guarding. He's not giving up a ton of separation. Guys are not open on Patrick Surtain. And so basically he's only getting 2 passes completed against him per game on average. That's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge probably for the Bengals offensive line. Even if Orlando Brown Jr. and Amari Mims are able to play, we know that the interior line of the Bengals offense has been causing issues. And if former Bengals coach, Vance Joseph, who is now the defensive coordinator for the Broncos, if he is able to dial up some creative blitzes or coverages to somehow confuse Joe Burrow and get pressure on him and not allow Joe Burrow to scramble around, make plays, as we have seen him do time and time again, they may be able to stop this high-powered Bengals offense. One of the things that's interesting is even in so many of these games the Bengals lost early in the season, they were losing tight games but scoring more than 30 points. I don't know if the Bengals put up more than, let's say, 28 points. So if they go over 4 touchdowns against the Broncos, that should be enough to win. But we never know with this Bengals defense. They gave up 6 points last week, but we'll see if they can continue that trend. I'm not going to make any predictions for the game, but I'm feeling anxious. I'm not feeling great. I'm not overly confident, let's say. So I'll be waiting anxiously, and then I'll come back and break it down after the game and give you my own insights, perspectives, opinions about what I saw. Now, that's pretty much it for the preview, but I want to take a moment to just have a moment of self-indulgence, go into another discussion topic of why do I do this podcast? Because like I always say, there's no ads. I'm not selling anything. The whole idea of this podcast was just to give a unique perspective from a fan who also used to play college football. So I have a perspective of someone who played the game a little bit, and I think about it from the mindset somewhat of a player, not an NFL player. I never played for money, so I don't know what that's like to be like a player like Mike Hilton, who is trying to earn his next contract. So that could be a reason why we're seeing a little bit of a improvement in Mike Hilton's performance. Now he knows these might be the last game. He knows that these are the last games on his current contract. So you definitely want to have a strong finish, making those tackles for losses, all those kind of plays. Even if he had a down kind of middle of the year, Mike Hilton could be coming back. So stuff like that, I don't know the ins and outs of that. But one of the things I even asked myself, because this podcast isn't super popular, and I don't promote the podcast, I don't expect it to be popular, but I know that by almost the nature of the things that I'm saying, the fact that I'm not overly optimistic and saying how the Bengals are like the best team ever and they're going to make it all the way to the Super Bowl this year, and kind of having unrealistic expectations. I try to set realistic expectations so that if the least likely thing doesn't happen, I won't be disappointed. I know right now the Bengals playoff odds are very slim, but a lot of people are talking about it like it's a foregone conclusion that the Bengals are going to make the playoffs, defy all the odds. They're going to win all their games. Everything's going to line up for the Bengals. And then when it doesn't happen, they're going to be disappointed. Just like fans were disappointed going into the start of this season, and we lost the team, the Bengals, lost the first 3 games of the season. And a lot of people were disappointed because it went against the narrative they had heard all offseason about how this team was the best roster, best coaches, and they're going to the Super Bowl. I'm trying to give you my own perspective, my own thoughts. So I don't listen to other shows, other podcasts. As much as I love podcasts, and I listen to tons of them, especially about the Bengals, because that's my favorite team. I love hearing other people being excited and talking about my team, and I've listened to almost all of them. There's so many. I can't say I've listened to everyone. Let's be honest. I don't have that much time. But I've checked in on a few here and there, and they're all great in their own way, and they appeal to different people with different tastes. So I just wanted to give my own flavor, my own spin on things. One of the things that I noticed, though, last week that was kind of solidified for me why I do this podcast. So when Amarius Mims went out of the game, and everybody saw he was having an argument on the sidelines with Coach Frank Pollock, right? He's arguing with him. He's on the sidelines. My interpretation of what I saw with my eyeballs on the broadcast was a player who is telling the coach, hey, coach, something is not right with me physically. I don't think I can go in the game. The coach is saying, hey, get your ass in the game. It's a big game. We need you. And he was not trying to go in the game. That's, to me, from my perspective, what I saw and what made sense to me. When I went and listened to the other podcasts, like major podcasts, I won't name any names, but like one that's associated with a major newspaper organization based in, it's the New York Times. Anyway, the New York Times reporter for The Athletic, his interpretation of that event was the argument was based around the idea that the player was telling the coach that he wanted to go back into the game, but the coach was saying, no, I don't think that's a good idea. And the coach was saying, I think you should sit out instead. And then I listened to a bunch of other podcasts, and they all said the same thing. And I saw a bunch of other stories, in text, newspapers, and all kinds of stuff. And they all basically said the same thing of, we saw this argument, and we would assume that Amari Mims was arguing to go back in the game, but the coach wouldn't let him. So all these other shows, all these other podcasts are saying basically the exact opposite of what I said. Now, does that make me worry? Does that make me question myself, what I saw? Do I think I'm wrong? Absolutely not. I remain unchanged in my opinion of what I saw, what I thought in that moment. I don't think I was wrong at all. I think there's multiple ways to look at things, and I'm not going to play the clip here, but there was a clip that they showed after the game where this same reporter went up and asked Amarius what was going on in that moment. It looked like you were having kind of an argument. And Amarius said, you've got to understand, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, basically, you've got to understand when you're out there, you're protecting Joe Burrow, who's the franchise, is important. And so the reporter's like, yeah, right, protecting Joe Burrow, that's all the stuff he wants to hear. And Amarius continued, he said, and so if you're not feeling something's off, a little bit not right, he's basically saying in that moment he needed to get checked out by the doctors, and that's why he told them to put his backup, Devin Cochran, into the game. Because he said, if you're not feeling right, that's when people can get hurt. And my interpretation of him saying that's how people can get hurt and I needed to come out was saying, if I'm not 100%, I might not be able to protect Joe Burrow sufficiently, and Joe Burrow might get hurt. So he was saying he thought it was better for himself to take himself out, get checked out, do whatever he had to do, but he wasn't feeling ready to go in the game. That's my interpretation of it. The reporter who was asking him the question was, but almost trying to feed him the answer of the story that he wanted to write about this. And he was saying, but you wanted to go back in the game though, right? But you were trying to get back in though. That's why you were arguing though, right? He's trying to feed him this idea of that but he was fighting to go back in. Why would he do that? Because this guy's been around the team long enough. His role is to make players look good. Just like HBO, they show Hard Knocks. The players want to look good. The teams want to look good. Everybody wants to make themselves look good on TV and in the podcast spheres and YouTube shows and all that other stuff. So this reporter, he's trying to kind of coax the player, ask him leading questions. And they all do this. All the reporters in sports media do this. They ask leading questions to try, most of the time, if they're smart, they try to ask questions that the player can answer in a way that makes them look good, makes the team look good, is positive. And they've been coached and got media training. So sometimes the reporters ask kind of gotcha asshole questions, but not too many. Because if you go into the media room for a team, you start causing trouble, trying to expose people and ask a bunch of hard-hitting questions, well, then that player, that team isn't going to want to do, an exclusive interview with you. Like, no, thank you. I would rather give that to the reporter that made me look good and asked me a bunch of softball questions that were easy to answer and easy to make myself look good. So that's just what I want people to keep in mind. That's what I have to keep in mind myself is these reporters, they're doing a job. They're making entertainment for you, the fan, and that's their career. They have to keep you interested in clicking on their stories, watching their shows, consuming their content so they can continue to sell you ads, sell you gambling, and CBD gummies and all kinds of stuff that you probably don't need. But that's their career. And so I'm not trying to take away from that. I understand they've got a job to do, but this is the freedom that I have as an independent podcaster. This is what the democracy of the internet is all about, because the only thing that is driving me is not money, to make this podcast. It's just to get a unique idea out there and a unique voice. Because I feel like what happens too many times is one person or a small group of people craft the narrative of what they think fans want to hear. What's going to be the most pleasing to the Bengals audience? Bengals audience doesn't want to hear that their first round pick, who's supposed to be the next Anthony Munoz, pulled himself out of the game because he wasn't quite feeling 100%. They want to hear a story about how the first round pick was fighting to get in the game and the coach just wouldn't let him. That's what fans might want to hear, but I would just say, ask yourself, does that make sense if it were any other team? Let's say it's not the Bengals, but just say any team, NFL or college or whatever level, but let's say NFL, another NFL team. You've got a player on the sidelines, and the doctors have checked him out and given him clearance to go back into the game. That's supposedly the story, was the Bengals medical staff gave full clearance for Amarius to go back into the game, but the coach wouldn't let him. Does that make any sense? I've never heard of an NFL coach not letting the starter go back into the game, especially when the backup is on his first play committing a penalty and then giving up all kinds of sacks to Joe Burrow. I can't really envision a scenario where a sane coach who wants to keep their job would say, absolutely not. One of the best players that we have on the team, I don't want you in the game right now. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I've never heard of something like that happening in a game. And if Amarius was so eager to get back in the game, he would have had his helmet on his head, chin strap buckled, and they would have had to have been pulling him back off the field. That's not, from the body language, that's not what I was reading in that situation at all. Amarius had the helmet off the head, on top, unbuckled, and he didn't really look like he was going into the game anytime soon at all. So, like I said, but every other show that you listen to was talking about this in the context of the complete opposite scenario. Because fans want to believe the other narrative. And so I'm sure, in the off season, that's going to be the facts. And people, you could leave comments. Please leave comments. Tell me I'm wrong. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm completely fabricating all of this. That's great. Because, like I said, that's the power of the internet. That's why everybody is free to record their own podcast within the limits of, the content moderation standards. I'm not going to go crazy and say anything slanderous or libelous or whichever one is spoken for. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. This is an illegal podcast. But the point is, people can leave comments saying they don't trust me. Why should they trust me? Because I'm not the reporter who's been in the locker room, who has been reporting on the team and giving them their valuable stories for years and decades. And that's true. But I also have nothing to lose at all. I have no reason to lie, to fabricate anything. So I'm not worried about losing fans because there are no fans. What am I going to lose? I got nothing to lose. I'm just giving you my honest opinion. So that's just a reminder to me. Why do I do this? To get some other viewpoint out there, because too often it's just like, the echo chamber. Why do I need to make a podcast that says the exact same thing as 50 other podcasts? That doesn't provide any value to anybody, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everybody wants to hear the 51st podcast of me just rehashing and regurgitating all the stories that were on ESPN or the New York Times or NFL.com or whatever. You can go read those stories yourself. Nobody cares about that. But I wanted to give, like I said, my own perspective as a fan. And the other thing that grinds my gears about some of these shows, if I'm going to be totally self-indulgent, they all take the perspective of what if they were Mike Brown? What if I were the general manager / owner of the team, but you're not? Again, that's like saying, what if I won the Mega Millions lottery and all of a sudden I won $1 billion? What would I do with it? Gee, well, I mean, that's a fun thing to think about, but that's like the least likely thing you're more likely to get hit by lightning than to own an NFL franchise. So it's not even worth the time to think about that. But there's so many podcasts, that's all that they ever do. We should sign this guy. We should trade this guy. We should fire this guy. Like, I have no control over any of that. I am just a spectator, spectating and giving you my thoughts about what I see and hear. So if you care anything about that, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, leave me a comment. Tell me, like I said, tell me I'm either way off base or that you appreciate the podcast and a different perspective on things. I'll be back after this Bengals game, hopefully to discuss a big win. And it won't be a clinching win. That's the thing, is even if they win out, the Bengals aren't guaranteed to get into the playoffs. But on the other hand, it makes these games at least that much more entertaining and fun to watch, because it's no fun when your team is already out of it. There's nothing to play for. These games have a lot of excitement and energy. So I'm pumped. Hopefully the Bengals fan base is going to be pumped for this week and the week after when they go to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. But one game at a time, that's what these players are doing. And the reporters, I forget who it was, but somebody asked Jamar Chase, do you guys wish sometimes that you would have won that game in week 1 against the Patriots so that now your playoff odds would be better? Something like that. They asked him, do you ever, basically, don't you wish you had won more games earlier in the season? And Jamar Chase just basically bluntly said, no, like that's a fan mentality. Players don't think that way. Players aren't worried about the game that they lost 3 months ago, because the only thing that can be on their minds is the next opponent, the team that's coming up next. Whenever it is, wherever it is, they don't even know, but it doesn't matter. That's the only thing that's important, is the next opponent on the schedule. And this week, it's the Denver Broncos. That's all they're thinking about. They're not worried about, woulda, shoulda, coulda, would it be different? Joe Burrow could win this award. None of that stuff matters. The only thing that matters is winning this game Saturday afternoon in Cincinnati, and I really hope it doesn't rain. That's all I'm going to say. So until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.